I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist,
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
and this is When East
Meets West. So I think everybody is probably pretty familiar with the experience of self-criticism, unfortunately. Would you agree with that, Pete?
No, I don't ever criticize myself.
Never, never. I've never heard you say anything.
Yeah, no, we
Maybe
are we are
we
all
do.
critical.
We're all critical.
Well, I
We're all
think a lot of us are our worst enemy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what always really makes me sad is that a lot of times people believe that this critical voice that we all have is helpful. I
Yeah.
hear that from patients a lot. Like, oh, I don't want to
So
let
say
go of
more
that.
about that. What would you say? Like, how do they find it to be helpful?
Well, so I guess I'll start by saying, a common phrase that's used when referring to self-criticism is the inner critic. If you
Yes.
Google the inner critic, there's a lot of writing about that.
Hmm.
And I also want to say everybody has an inner critic. So,
Yes.
Pete and I are, joking here. We all have it. I have it. Pete has it. Everybody does. And a lot of times people believe that when they're hard on themselves, they judge themselves negatively, that it like gets them on their A game
Yeah.
basically, like it gets them to do things.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate kernel of truth in that is that for some people in the short term, it does get them to do things. It's kind of, I'm going to use a sports metaphor here that I'm sure Pete,
Yes.
Pete that Pete would probably use as well, which is like, think of if you ever like had a coach or a teacher who, the teacher that like yelled at you or the coach that was shouting at you, you probably complied in the short
Yes.
term, right? You probably complied. But if you can think back to Pete, coaches you've had like that, what are the long-term consequences of having that voice in your ear all the time?
Doesn't feel good. Well, and I think like CBT, I think we look at that as depression as a big piece of it, right? Like I was thinking of Aaron Beck, and I think a lot of his research initially, like in the early 80s, looked at like self-dependency and this autonomy related to like these negative thoughts in the self-critic as part of depression.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I'm
I'm
sure
not
you
sure.
can articulate that a lot better than I could.
No, I was gonna say I actually not. It's been so long. Some
That
dove into
second
Aaron
wave,
Beck story, that second
I
wave
know.
stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, no. I mean, absolutely. That like negative self talk was
Yeah.
sort of there was a lot of early research around that and how that was tied to feeling depressed, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like the more unkind or even cruel you are to yourself,
Right.
you're going to feel down. Kind of going back to thinking about coaches you had that were
Yeah. Well, it
being
makes you
cruel to
feel like
you.
you're deficient,
Yeah,
like that you're missing something or that, you haven't done something you're supposed to be doing or,
yeah,
not good enough to do it.
yeah, yeah. And what's so interesting is that if you think about that, so like if being hard on yourself or on others in the short term, quote unquote, works, like it's
Yeah.
getting you or someone else to comply, it's very short-sighted because ultimately the problem, what Pete's highlighting is that you feel deficient, like you don't feel good enough. You're also going to have a lot of emotional distress, right? Like you're going to
Yeah.
feel down, you're going to feel sometimes shame,
Right.
right?
Right.
Maybe guilt, anxiety, about like doing it right. We know that when our emotions get bigger and bigger, the term being dysregulated,
Hmm.
emotion dysregulation interrupts cognitive processing,
It sure
right?
does.
So,
Yeah.
if we're then feeling like all of these uncomfortable, dysregulated emotions, and then we get foggy in how we think, it's actually a lot harder to then keep doing behavior
Yeah.
effectively. So,
And
go ahead.
one of the
Yeah.
things I keep thinking about is the developmental aspect of this, because I
Mm,
think, yeah, I I don't typically go into a extensive developmental process. I mean,
hmm.
I do. I mean, the
Yeah,
first
you did.
session is all
Yeah.
about everything, but
Yep.
then typically in cognitive behavioral therapy, especially third wave, we're just like, let's deal with what we have now and work towards acceptance. But I am wondering, like developmentally, like I think the self critic does kind of develop from some
Hmm.
of the messages we receive from a really early age. Because I think of like my mom has three boys, and so we mess with her. She's got she's got some tough skin these days.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I joke with her, and I'm just like, "Oh, mom, you're always really good with the oh my god, with the compliments,
Oh, yes, uh-huh.
or some
Yes,
validation, or
yes.
some recognition of because those moments do help taper the self-critic, or at least you start to learn a better relationship with the self-critic the more you're getting validation, maybe from a developmental prospect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you have, yes, so growing up, if you have caregivers, other adults in your life that are able to step in and say, like, you're okay. You're allowed to struggle. Like,
Right.
making mistakes is okay, right? That does help to then begin to more internalize that more compassionate voice, to
Yeah.
practice that, right? Unfortunately, and this is the bummer, it's not going to eliminate that inner critic voice,
No. Right.
because that, and this is, it's getting into kind of geeky, evolutionary stuff here, judgments. That voice is hardwired into us, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
human brains are designed to evaluate. Like, we're constantly evaluating what's good, what's bad,
Yeah.
what's right, what's wrong. And look, the advantage to that is that, judgments are quick information.
They
It's
are.
like I
Yeah.
say, like I always tell patients, like, look, I love to travel back in time 40,000 years, ago. If you're like out looking for berries and there's a rustling in the bushes and you don't know what it is, and you're like, quick assumption, quick judgment, probably a saber-toothed tiger. Like, that was really helpful,
Yeah. Get
But
out.
then, like, yeah, in 2020, when we're recording this, if you're uh I don't know, doing a podcast with your dear friend, and your mind's like, I don't know, did I just say something
Yeah.
weird?
Who's
Did that come?
listening?
Who's listening?
I sound stupid.
I sound stupid,
Yeah.
right? Like, that quick assumption, like, doesn't work so well,
Yeah.
right? And so people do need to understand that this is built into our wiring, and we don't have to give it as much power as it often has over us.
And I think maybe for people that are listening with kids, I mean, I think this is where I focus on my nieces, and I think, like, I have such the shrink language,
Yeah.
because not every parent is able to be like, I can see that you're really frustrated right now, and so I can't help you when you're screaming. So if you can calm down a little bit and use your words, I'm
Hmm.
going to be able to help you find your Mickey Mouse, or that you can't
Yes.
find,
Yeah.
and I think that I do wish that I don't wish this,
Well,
actually. I mean, I think my parents did perfect, but, like, it could have been nice to have a little bit of that, growing up. Just throwing that out there.
well, Mom, if you're listening,
Oh, she won't
yeah,
listen.
she's listening to all of them.
She will,
So,
actually. I just put it on her phone so she can listen.
yeah.
But go ahead.
So, well, and that, I like, actually, that example of, like, it would be a bit. It's nice to have, like, again. So if a parent's saying to a child, like, it's okay, like, if we can, take a moment when I hear you're screaming, right? Can we come back to this? We can actually talk to our inner critic in the same way,
That's right.
So I always like to sort of help people externalize the inner critic, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes I make a I make a
Oh,
joke
yeah,
that
that's good.
I'll say, like, I'll ask people, like, do you hear your inner critic, like, in your own voice? And most
Yeah,
people will be like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, I want you, it's not you talking.
that's right.
It's this critic, it's this
Who
inner
do you
critic.
use?
Well, so this is what first I say. First, I like to say, it's actually your inner critic, and we're gonna come. And I'll say, like, we'll come up with, like, some kind of, like, cartoon or something. You want to imagine who it
I
is?
can't wait to tell you who I use.
Oh,
Go.
oh, okay. So I'll say, but right now they're wearing, like, if I was talking to you, Pete, I'd be like, well, your inner critic's wearing, like, a peach-shaped costume and using one of those voice converters to make them sound like you. So, like,
Hiding.
hiding, right? So we've
Yeah.
got to, like, first help, like, take the mask off and go, like, oh, okay, buddy, like,
Yeah.
I see who you are. So who do you use? Who do
I
you
use
use?
Homer Simpson.
Oh, that's amazing. That's
Because I
amazing.
feel like almost everybody knows who Homer
Yes.
Simpson is these days, and
Yes.
that's it's a diffusion technique.
Yeah,
So
it is a diffusion. Yeah, so
yeah,
diffusion, for our listeners, is a term. Cognitive diffusion is basically unsticking from thoughts, right? So you get
yes,
some distance. The mindfulness technique. I tend to use Mickey Mouse.
that's a good one too.
Yeah,
That's a
well,
because
because
that's
it's one of the
that's my.
voices I can do. It's one of the few
No, you
voices I can do.
can't.
Oh yeah, I go
Will
like,
you?
oh, sure, yeah. I'll
It's
be like, so if your inner critic was saying to you, "That's stupid," it's
yeah.
like, "That's stupid," right?
That's so good. I can't do
Well,
Homer Simpson, so don't ask
well,
me.
you could say "don't," right?
Don't,
That's
don't,
"don't, don't,"
don't.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's like, "Oh, please don't, please."
I know,
That's
but
the extent of my voice work. Yeah.
well, I like your voice work, but I think I like that you said about the A game, because it's interesting that I think a lot of athletes kind of do think that. And I remember, you'd the self-critic during a race, during
Oh
practice.
yeah. Oh.
Um, even as I just took on this new project of, can I do this? Like, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's
Yeah,
everywhere. And so we have to just start by radically accepting that it is a voice that's going to show up. It's a part of our brains. Like, it's that the inner critic lives in our brains. We can't surgically remove it.
hmm,
And we get to choose the relationship that we have with it. We can choose to interact with it in a different way.
yeah,
And, this is where self-compassion comes in. And obviously we talked about self-compassion in episode 8 when we discussed compassion in general. So, for listeners that are interested in learning more, the work of Kristen Neff,
Oh,
Dr.
yep.
Kristen Neff, she's currently in the field, kind of like the preeminent researcher on self-compassion. I think we mentioned also Christopher Germer, Paul Gilbert's compassion in general. But self-compassion is a behavior of, as Kristen Neff defines it, that includes speaking to yourself in a kind way, right? Radically accepting that you made a mistake or something happened you didn't like, and then recognizing a common humanity that we're all struggling. And I think the common humanity piece here too is recognizing we all are criticizing ourselves. Everybody, we're all stuck in that.
Sometimes I'll say, like Shakira, like, how do you think she feels when she's getting on stage? Even the most confident person will have, and I don't know her personally, I wish I did.
I was
the
same. I would say,
yeah.
We're the same height. So.
Yeah.
So I like that.
But,
I love that. Yeah.
knowing high performers and having worked with, a variety of very successful people, they all have it. World Series, the NBA Finals, everyone's going to have a thought of like, can I do this? Am I going to win?
Right. And so you get to choose whether or not you, I'll say like give it the stage, right? Or take the microphone away. Right. Like, and we don't like rip the microphone out of its hands, right? Like we can't like fight the inner critic with like more criticism, So it's like, we're not gonna like get into a shouting match. So it's like I sometimes I also like to imagine is like, everybody's gone to a wedding where there's like some like, I don't know, like distant cousin or uncle who's like, was talking too long during the speech and saying some inappropriate stuff, but they're not a bad guy or whatever. And so it's like, I say like, treat the inner critic that way, where it's like, oh, okay, like kindness, all right, and just gently reach over and take the microphone away, right? You're just going to gently reach over and like refocus back on the moment. And so no matter how loud it's yelling at you, and it's hard, sometimes our inner critic's really loud. I mean, haven't you had that experience where it's like so loud?
Can I throw us a curveball?
Yeah, throw us a curveball.
Because I don't treat eating disorders, but I guess what I've been wondering is like the body dysmorphia, and there's going to be someone listening that has struggled with how they look, because we all do. And we know that that's one of the major issues of eating disorders. There's a ton of research that shows that when they have the conceptualization of their body, it's completely distorted.
And well, I would say I also don't treat eating disorders or specialize in them. And this is where, down the line, we're going to have Dr. Danielle Keenan Miller is going to come talk to us about this. She's excellent. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is one version of the inner critic, right? Can be on body image. And to be frank, and this does come up frequently in my work. Even if you don't struggle with an eating disorder, we all have negative body image thoughts, right? That's like that this just comes back to like, this is hardwired into us.
Is there anyone who doesn't?
No. I mean, I don't think so, because there's the inner critic is constantly evaluating.
Because even the people that are on like social media, so we could bring that up, because social media is probably fostering the negativity around the self-critic. Honestly, it's actually social media is probably turning up the volume of the self-critic.
Oh, I'm sure it is, because you know what? This is also important to say, because the inner critic is tied to perfectionism a lot of times, and social media is, and I say this all the time, Pete knows this, have a lot of opinions on social media. I know there's very helpful things about it, and there are also very unhelpful things. The very unhelpful things is that it's a cultivated fantasy that people are presenting to the world. And so when you look at a glossy picture that says, everything's amazing and wonderful, that's going to activate the inner critic. Like, well, my life's not like that. I'm messing up.
You see that a lot with like new moms, where they're
all the
they feel depressed or they're sleep deprived, and they're like, they hate their new child, and they feel the self-critic goes crazy of like, how do I not feel this joy? And it's like, because you're not sleeping.
That's right. And, no, absolutely. And that's actually one of the first things I'll recommend to people is like, get off social media, because the inner critic's going to be there anyway. Like, take a break from social media, because we don't need extra things to turn the volume
beat ourselves up.
We don't need help. No, we don't need help with that. So, I think it's important to actually, might sound funny, but it's like, we have to be compassionate to the inner critic.
You said compassion. What else are other strategies you feel like that help to lower the volume on the self-critic?
I mean, obviously, I mean, self-compassion really is the main one, but I
Yeah.
think that can be, it's a hard to call, self-compassion's it's not an easy behavior, right? It
No.
takes time, especially if the inner critic's really loud.
Right.
So this is a part of self-compassion. I start with mindfulness. I start with the diffusion techniques that you're talking about. Like, can we just get a little space from these sticky, loud,
Right.
mean thoughts, right? Like, so, you know, if it's like super loud in your ear, it's like, well, can you just notice like that's a thought, and
Right.
refocus back on the moment?
That's
Is that what
helpful.
you do? Is that what you do as well?
Yeah,
Or
definitely. The
yeah.
mindfulness piece of it. I think, social media, I use the screen time a lot with folks now,
Hmm.
just to really limit their use because, and it usually blows their mind because a lot of us don't look at the screen time.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
now it, I don't know if you have an iPhone, it alerts you.
Well, but you can shut that off. And I have a lot of clients that shut
Oh,
it off. And, I think when you actually see those numbers, the amount of time that
subversive.
it's aversive.
It's aversive.
So
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
A little behavioral term here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
aversive
that is
meaning
helpful.
that it doesn't reinforce it eliminates the behavior.
Well, it's punishing.
It's
It's
punishing
fun.
the behavior to reduce it so that as you see these hours going up, you're likely to at least commit to trying to make them go down. So that's probably one of the biggest strategies that I've used. And then I think we do that a lot of just like letting clouds float in the sky, the
Yeah.
thoughts float on a cloud in the sky. It's a big part of the Zen world too, kind of thinking about
Yeah.
how Buddhism looks at this. It's not even a thing. It's just like you just accept that the self-critic is there, and then we commit towards trying to like build a relationship with it, and that's just part of our suffering.
Right. Absolutely. And that part of like interacting with it in a different way, like that's like, building a relationship with it. I think what I would want listeners to really maybe start with is understanding that, and people sometimes are surprised that I say this, the inner critic actually thinks it's helping you
Yeah,
a lot of times, right? Because if we go back to this notion of like it's going to get you on your A game,
yeah.
it thinks that if it's hard on you, that it's going to help you do better and be better.
I would make
So
you tougher.
yeah, I'm going to make you tougher. And sometimes it also even comes from a place of fear. Like it's afraid, like if I mess up,
Yeah,
right? If I don't do it right, if I'm not perfect, then, I'm going to be shamed, or I'm going to get in trouble, or I'm not going to be successful. So if we can actually start by understanding that the inner critic, in its extremely unhelpful and misinformed way is trying to help us, right?
yeah, yeah.
I think that can bring some more compassion to it, so that we're not, like I said, shouting back at it. It's kind of back to like, the uncle that's going on too long at the wedding where you're like, oh, like he means well, right?
Yeah.
And that's not appropriate. I'm just going to gently take the mic away.
And maybe practicing, that's also like a little bit of gratitude could be sprinkled in there, where again, that's one of those challenges that we're
Mm.
embracing and saying like, you know what, I'm okay with my self-critic, and I'm not going to give that self-critic too much volume.
Yeah, you're gonna notice that's there. You're gonna notice that the volume's always gonna be turned on, right? that dial is broken, right? You can't mute it,
Yeah.
and you can learn to turn the volume down and take the mic away. This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin.
And I'm Dr. Pete Economo. Be present, be brave. This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.